He built nothing, my wife said loud right there in open court. I clenched my jaw and just sat with that. The judge leaned forward. Counsel. Are you sure about that? My wife smirked, completely confident, had absolutely no idea what was about to hit her. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 38 years old and I'm a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm. I have literally spent my entire adult life building things. Blueprints, timelines, budgets, actual physical structures that are still standing long after everybody forgot who planned them. That's what I do. That's who I am. I didn't grow up with money. No inheritance, no family safety net, no uncle with connections, no parents with property to hand down. Everything I have I built from scratch, and I mean that with zero exaggeration. My first apartment had a radiator that only worked half the time and a window that wouldn't close all the way. I wore the same 2 pairs of work boots for 3 straight years because every extra dollar was going straight into savings. I wasn't embarrassed about any of that. I was proud of it. Because I knew exactly where I was headed, even when nobody else could see it. I met my wife Renee 9 years ago, charming, bright-eyed, full of energy. Back then she was still figuring out her path, and I was completely fine with that. I believed in her. So while I worked my steady job, managed our finances, and made sure the bills were always covered, she had the freedom to explore what she called her lifestyle brand, social media content, events. Networking, I supported all of it without complaint. Most of it didn't bring in consistent income, but I never once made her feel small about that, because that's just not who I am. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. Renee started caring a whole lot about appearances, about status, about what our life looked like from the outside. And her family, her mother especially, never really respected me. To them, I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't flashy enough, didn't talk a big enough game. They wanted somebody who drove a loud car and wore expensive watches. I drove a clean, paid-off truck and wore a decent watch I bought on sale. That was basically a personality flaw to these people. Despite all of it, I stayed. I paid most of the bills. I handled the repairs, the insurance, the mortgage. I was loyal in every sense of the word, just not loud about it. I wasn't the loudest person in the room, but I was the one holding everything together. And here's what you really need to know about me. I keep records. I plan ahead. I don't let details slip through the cracks. That habit right there, that's what saved me in that courtroom. If you've ever worked quietly while somebody else took the credit, you already know the feeling in your chest right now. That slow burn of being completely unseen. Of doing the most and still somehow being treated like the least. I see you, and I want you to stick around because this story is for you. Subscribe if you haven't already and drop a comment below. Tell me about a time someone underestimated you. I read every single one. Because sometimes the people closest to you forget everything you've done, right up until it's too late. Let me show you exactly how it all fell apart and came back around. The courtroom smelled like old paper and cheap air conditioning. That flat, recycled air that makes everything feel heavier than it already is. I sat at the defendant's table in a gray suit I hadn't worn since my last company presentation. Hands folded on the table in front of me, calm on the outside, my stomach, though, a complete mess. Renee sat across the room looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. Structured blazer, hair done up perfectly, every inch of her put together for the occasion. Her attorney, sharp-dressed guy named Fitzgerald, had that particular kind of confidence that comes from winning cases for people who really don't deserve to win. He wasted absolutely no time. "Your Honor," he said, straightening his notes, "my client, Mrs. Harper, has been the primary driver of this household's quality of life. She built the social presence, cultivated the professional relationships, maintained the family's public standing, while Mr. Harper remained largely passive in those efforts." Passive. Y'all, I had worked 60-hour weeks. I ate lunch at my desk for years. Passive. Fitzgerald kept going, laying out what he called the true picture of their marriage. According to him, I had basically coasted, just existed. Showed up physically but contributed almost nothing of substance. He made me sound like furniture, like background noise in somebody else's story. Then Renee spoke, and she did not hold back. "He just existed," she said, her voice steady, almost rehearsed. "I built this life. I built our image, our home, our social world. He was there, sure, but he wasn't building anything. A few people were in the gallery, mostly strangers, a handful of her family members. I heard one of them make this quiet little approving sound like she'd said something brave, something true. I looked down at my hands. Judge Patricia Holt had been writing notes steadily through all of it. Sharp eyes, the kind that make you feel like she's solving a puzzle in real time just by looking at you. She hadn't reacted dramatically, she was just listening. But I noticed something. Every time Fitzgerald made a big sweeping claim, she'd glance up and write something down. Not just when things were said, when things didn't quite add up. Then Renee made the move that really changed the air in that room. "He has no idea what it costs to run a household at the level we maintained," she said. "I managed everything, I made the decisions. He just signed what I put in front of him, signed what she put in front of him." I almost laughed out loud. I genuinely wanted to, but I kept my face completely neutral. Because here's the thing about that statement, it was almost true. I did sign documents she prepared, but not because I was some clueless bystander, because I trusted her. And because I had kept copies of every single one of them. "Counsel," Judge Holt said, her pen hovering, "your client states she managed all major financial decisions. Is there documentation to support that?" Fitzgerald smiled real easy. "We're prepared to submit financial statements, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly, wrote something else down, first crack. "Small, but I felt it. Let me take you back before the courtroom. Because to understand what happened that day, you've got to understand what had been quietly going on inside our marriage for years. Betrayal doesn't usually announce itself. It sneaks in through small choices. Renee had been redirecting money from our joint account long before I realized it was even a pattern. At first it looked like normal spending, subscriptions, events, business expenses for her brand, but when I actually started tracking the numbers, they didn't lie. Funds were being moved. Bills I thought we were sharing were being listed in her name alone. Accounts I thought were joint had been quietly restructured. She wasn't just spending freely. She was rewriting our financial history to make herself look like the sole contributor, and at the same time, she was running a whole parallel story to anyone who would listen. Friends, her mother. Mutual acquaintances. She painted me as the guy who just went to work and came home, the quiet one, the one who wasn't really present. People believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was charming, articulate, and really good at controlling a narrative. Fitzgerald's strategy in court was aggressive. He wanted to bury me under a version of events so detailed and so confidently delivered that I'd either crack emotionally or look completely incompetent trying to dispute it. And I'll be straight with y'all, there were moments where it got to me. Sitting there listening to this polished, expensive attorney describe my marriage like I was some passive bystander in my own life, that hit. Not because it was true, but because I knew how many people in that room might actually believe it. There's something deeply disorienting about hearing your life described in a way that's specifically designed to make you invisible, but I held it together, not because I'm made of stone. Because I knew exactly what I had. My attorney Sandra had coached me beforehand. "Don't argue with their framing," she told me. "Just introduce the facts. Let the facts do the heavy lifting." So when Fitzgerald claimed Renee had been the financial anchor of our marriage, I didn't raise my voice. I just said calmly I'd be happy for the court to examine the actual payment records. Fitzgerald didn't flinch, but Renee did, just barely, just enough. Small contradictions were starting to surface, dates that didn't line up, amounts that didn't match, claims about property that couldn't hold up against the actual documents. Renee was still sitting there with her chin up, still looking confident, but her fingers, I noticed, had tightened around her pen. The truth had started pulling at the edges of their story. And it wasn't going to stop. What they didn't know, what they never even considered, was that I had documented everything, not out of suspicion, not because I saw any of this coming. I documented everything because that's just how I'm wired. I'm a project manager. Tracking things, building paper trails, that's not a habit for me, it's a reflex. Every joint payment. Every transfer, every contractor bill from our kitchen renovation, every mortgage statement, every email confirming property decisions, all of it, organized by date, filed by category. Backed up in 2 separate places, but the most important document, the one that was about to shift everything, was the ownership structure of the house. Renee had been claiming the house was primarily hers, her contribution, her vision, her choice, but what she kept glossing right over was whose name had carried the original mortgage. Who had made every single payment for the first 4 years before we ever refinanced, who had put up the down payment from a savings account that existed before we were even married. The story she was telling only worked if nobody actually checked. Judge Holt was checking, I could feel it. She'd started asking Fitzgerald clarifying questions with a sharper edge than before. Not aggressive, just precise. The kind of questions you ask when something isn't adding up and you want to see what happens when you press on it. Counsel, your client mentioned primary financial contribution. Can you clarify the original mortgage holder? Fitzgerald paused. We can provide relevant documentation, Your Honor. Please do, she said, and she wrote something down. The whole room could feel the pressure shifting. Renee couldn't see it yet. But it was already in motion. I didn't get through any of this alone, and I want to be real clear about that. There's a man named Robert Chen who I've worked alongside on and off for 11 years. He's in his late 60s, semi-retired, the kind of person who has seen absolutely everything in the professional world and still has patience for it. He was my mentor when I was first coming up in construction management, and he never really stopped being someone I could go to when things got complicated. When Renee first filed for divorce, I was a mess. Not on the outside, but inside I was spiraling. I didn't know how to fight something that felt this deeply unfair. I didn't know how to defend myself against a version of events that had been carefully crafted to erase me. Robert sat me down over coffee and said something I haven't forgotten since. Daniel, you've been building things your whole life. This is just another build. You start with a solid foundation and you let the structure speak for itself. He connected me with Sandra, his attorney from a previous business dispute. She was sharp, experienced, and she saw right through what Renee's team was doing within about 10 minutes of our first conversation. They're betting on emotion, she told me. They want you to get defensive, to react, to come across as bitter or volatile. So we don't give them that, we give them facts. Clean, organized, verified facts. Meanwhile, Renee's family was getting louder and more confident on their side. Her mother was telling people the settlement was basically already decided. That Renee had it completely handled, that I had nothing real to bring to court. Renee herself got more relaxed, more arrogant. She started treating the whole process like a formality before her victory. They thought my silence meant I was weak. I was letting them think exactly that. Staying calm, staying measured, letting them believe they had the upper hand. Because every single day they underestimated me was another day I got more ready for what was coming. The moment arrived on the third day of proceedings. Judge Holt looked at Sandra and said, "Counselor, I'd like to see the verified financial records your client referenced." Sandra stood up. "Yes, Your Honor, we're ready." What followed was methodical, quiet, but it took apart everything they'd built piece by piece. Sandra walked the court through payment trails, going all the way back to the beginning of our marriage. Clear documentation of who paid what and when. Then she put up the ownership documents for the house. Original mortgage holder, down payment source, complete payment history. All of it right there, clean, dated, verified. The room went very quiet. Judge Holt looked at those documents for a long moment, then she looked at Fitzgerald. "So," she said, "he built nothing." Fitzgerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He said something about the broader context of contribution, about non-financial value, about lifestyle building. The judge let him finish, then she turned back to her notes. Renee went completely still. The color in her face changed, not dramatically, but enough. The story she had walked into that courtroom with was gone, and in its place was just the paper. Just the record, just the truth. Her lawyer scrambled to reframe the narrative. But you cannot reframe a mortgage document. You cannot spin a payment trail. The inconsistencies were now on the record, and Judge Holt had been quietly cataloging every single one of them from day one. I looked across the room at Renee. She didn't look back. I said quietly, just loud enough for the court to hear when Sandra gave me the moment, "I never needed credit, just the truth. That was all I had, that was all I needed." The ruling wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some big cinematic gavel moment, it was just fair. And honestly, after everything, fair felt like everything. Judge Holt recognized my contributions clearly and on the record. The house settlement got restructured. The asset division became balanced instead of the completely lopsided outcome Renee's team had designed. Her credibility with the court had collapsed under the weight of her own exaggerations. Renee walked out of that courtroom with a very different outcome than the one she'd been counting on. And her family, who had been so sure of her easy win, had absolutely nothing to say. I walked out with my dignity completely intact, and honestly, that mattered more to me than any number on a settlement document, because standing outside that courthouse in the afternoon sun, I realized something. Silence isn't weakness. Not when it's backed by truth. I hadn't tried to outargue Renee. I hadn't matched her team's aggression. I had just been ready. I let the facts breathe, and they spoke for themselves. She faced the consequences of the narrative she built, not the one about me, the one about herself, the one that required rewriting history and just hoping nobody ever checked. You don't have to prove your worth loudly. You just have to be ready when the moment comes. Have you ever been told you didn't do enough, even when you gave literally everything you had? I think a whole lot of us have been right there, working in the background, holding everything together, watching somebody else take credit for a life you built. Sometimes people rewrite your story. They do it confidently, publicly, with lawyers and blazers and rehearsed lines. But the truth doesn't just disappear because somebody talks louder than it. It waits, patient, documented. If this story hit something real for you, I want to hear about it. Drop your experience in the comments below. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Your effort matters even when nobody's watching it yet. And when your moment comes, just like mine did, you'll be real glad you kept the receipts. Click hype to help this story reach somebody else who needs it right now. Your story has power. If you felt any connection to mine, please subscribe and share what you've been through in the comments. Every hype you give this video helps put it in front of someone else who's been right where I was sitting. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.